On the very night that former President Trump was shot in the ear, speculation about was it really a bullet that hit him in the ear went wild. Well, we took a close look at the rifle and the caliber, fired some of these bullets, and we got the results on what exactly an ear wound coming out of this rifle with this caliber would look like. Now, before we get into it, I do want to take a moment and thank our sponsor, Jace Medical, for being the only place that I am aware of where you can get a U.S. doctor prescribing you emergency antibiotics or your chronic meds, as well as things like antivirals like Asaltamavir. You know, there's this whole bird flu scare. Be prepared. Have some on hand from a U.S. doctor and a U.S. pharmacy shipped straight to your house. My doctor wouldn't prescribe me this stuff unless I was at that point of needing it. Jace will give it to you in advance in case you need it. So I strongly believe that these are critical things that every American should have emergency antibiotics on hand. And even when we travel, we bring these with us. And again, we're promoting Chase because they're the only company in the world that does this. That link is below. When it comes to the media, you really don't know what to believe. It's so confusing. There should be some sort of standards on what it is a person can report. And we all watched former President Trump get shot in the ear. We at least saw him reach for his ear, go down, come back with blood on his ear, and then we were told a bunch of things. And I want to take a moment and specifically address the FBI chief who ultimately said that he probably did not get shot in the ear, that it was potentially shrapnel. So I want to take a moment and specifically talk about the gun used to shoot former President Trump. And I also want to look at his wound and see, is that the same type of wound that you would receive from the type of bullet that would come out of that gun? So we did a complete video on the gun and all the details on it, but ultimately what it was a 2013 DPMS Panther Arms A15 chambered in 223 and 5.56. And that's, again, confusing to a lot of people because it's either 5.56 or 223, but it actually literally says 223 and 5.56 on it. But either way, what a 223 and a 5.56 are is they're very similar bullets. You can fire a 223 out of a 5.56, but you can't fire a 5.56 out of a 223. A lot of the reason is because of the thickness of the casing itself, as far as the walls of the casing and the amount of gunpowder that's packed in there. Looking at this wound, let's just talk about the wound first, and then we'll talk about the bullet. The wound itself, according to doctors, was a 2-centimeter wound that went straight through the ear. Now, 2 centimeters is 20 millimeters or 0.78 inches. So he has a wound in his ear around 0.7 inches. Now, what's taking place out of this rifle? Let's talk now about the rifle itself. The rifle itself is firing a 0.22 inch wide bullet, or a 5.56 millimeter bullet, however you want to look at it. And the wound, when it's fired out of this particular rifle, and this rifle comes with a 1 1/8 inch twist, meaning it's twisting that bullet one time every 8 inches. So there's a full rotation of that bullet every 8 inches. So by the time it leaves the 16-inch barrel, it's already rotated twice. And it's leaving there spinning. And it's going to go direct. It's not tumbling. A lot of bullets might tumble as they shoot. Not this one. It's going to fire direct. And it's going to put a hole a little over 0.22 inches wide into a piece of paper. So here's that exact rifle. Here's me shooting that exact same rifle with 5.56 ammo in it. And this is ultimately what it does in paper. Now, if you compare that to the president's wound, ultimately it's putting a hole in a paper a little over 0.28 inches wide. Obviously, if it hits something thicker, it's going to rip it a little bit more because it's going to get through. That's for sure. With a 2 centimeter wound, you're ultimately looking at 20 millimeters so it's 4 times the width or the diameter of the actual bullet itself. So this wound is very much like the bullet wound you would receive. Now, obviously, if it hit like something thicker, like his head or his chest or his shoulder, it's going to tumble once it start hitting things inside of him. But as far as just ripping through something, and I would correlate this part of the ear, that thin part of the ear that you can see the wound is at, as being, thicker than paper, of course, but it's just going to rip through like paper. It's just going to put a perfect circle inside that, and it's probably going to be around 0.79 inches wide of a wound. So this wound to his ear is really exactly what it would be if it was a 0.22 inch diameter bullet ripping through something, going straight through, not tumbling, but going straight through, just zipping straight through like it would a piece of paper. And that's ultimately what you have. So, in the end, I'm not a doctor. I didn't look at his wound personally, even if I was. But what I will say is my experience with this rifle and these calibers is that it's just going to rip a tiny little circle, a little bit bigger than 0.22 inches through paper. And then it's going to get a little bit bigger if it's ripping through something thicker, like an ear. And that ear, it's going to be around it's going to be about 4 times the size of a hole through his ear. And that's ultimately what he has. So his wound is exactly like it would be if you were shot with a 5.56 out of an A15 DPMS Panther Arms with a 1 1/8 inch twist out of a 16-inch barrel. This is what the wound of an ear would look like. Now, the problem people are having is they're thinking of these rifles as being just, it's just going to rip a hole like the size of a bowling ball out of your chest, and that's just not the case. It just simply is not the case. They just don't understand the ballistics of this particular bullet out of this particular rifle. And, when you look at the types of wounds that maybe a chest wound would give, for example, and they say, well, wait a second, that looks different from his ear. Well, that's because it's ripping through just a thin layer of tissue versus hitting bone. And then once it starts going into something thick, it could tumble and just create a much larger cavern that is smaller, but it's just zipping through something like a piece of paper. Shoot a piece of paper with it. It's the same thing. Like you're going to see, it's just a little tiny hole that's a little bit bigger, about 1/4 inch wide at the most. And then once it gets something thicker, it's just going to create a slightly bigger hole. Roughly, probably, if you get about an ear's thick, you're looking at about 0.79 inches wide hole. That's just the reality. They think it's just going to tumble and just shred a bowling ball size wide hole, but it's not. It's just going to zip a little dinky hole in it. So, and that's really what that wound looks like to me. So, any thoughts or insight on this? Definitely put that below. Do want to take a moment and say that most people watch this channel, not subscribers. Click that subscribe button. It greatly increases the algorithm and our ability to get these messages out. That link is also below. But the most important part of this channel, we take prayer requests. So please don't ever hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.